This aircraft, the KC-135, was involved in a support mission supporting a B-52 in one of the routine test programs conducted by Boeing Aircraft Company. It required that the aircraft be rather heavily loaded with fuel.
The 7-man crew was headquartered out of the Clinton Sherman Air Force Base in Oklahoma. Their names are listed here on the memorial at 20th and PIATT. By all indications, they were a capable, experienced crew who found themselves in a helpless situation.
It was the most devastating thing. It still makes me teary just thinking about it.
Tracy Lempe is among several family members of the crew scattered around the world. Her father was Crew Chief Joseph Jenkins. Lempe was 3 years old at the time of the crash.
I've heard such wonderful things about the kind of man he was, to know that I don't have any memories of him.
But her sister Carol Lee was old enough to remember. She was the one who answered the door that morning to hear the tragic news.
I always tell my kids, ever since they were little, like my mom always told us, always say that you love that person because you never know if that's going to be the last time that you'll see them.
That's the same thing Irene Huber says. Her brother Danny Konensky was assistant crew chief. Huber was 9 years old and says she remembers that day like it was yesterday.
The media got the news before we did, and that was very difficult. And it was probably another 8 hours or 6 or 8 hours before we got the absolute word that it was my brother.
Meanwhile, Janine Widseth lost her husband.
Gary always said, if you're going to worry about me driving to the airport. You know, flying is very safe. And he'd say, don't worry about me, and I didn't.
Gary Widseth was the co-pilot. He was 26 years old. After 50 years, his wife still thinks about him every day.
And he was the man. He was so courteous, such a gentleman, so kind. He loved to fly. That was his, besides his family, that was his love.
As Captain Widseth's doomed flight was underway, his family in Oklahoma was spending their morning much like the families on PIATT Street.
My children were watching cartoons. That's when they had good cartoons. And they came in with a bulletin saying that a KC-135 had crashed in Wichita. And I knew it was his plane because he had told me that was it. They were the only 135 there. When something like that happens, three men come to your door. You know, someone from the squadron, chaplain, and a doctor. So I just waited for the 3 men to come, and when they came to the door, and of course my little kids were there too.
It was official word that her husband of 5 years and father of her 3 children was never returning home.
I visited the site of the accident a month after. Gary's best friend, Jerry, rented a plane and flew me up there. And then we took a cab out to the site and spent about 5 minutes there. It was a big hole. But I need to do things like that. I'm that kind of person.
Now, half a century later, Mrs. Widseth continues to grieve over that day, often thinking about her husband's final moments.
Because he was the co-pilot, he was sitting in that seat. And so was the captain. But everybody else, from my understanding, were standing in the cockpit because they knew there was something going on. I think the plane, from what I've heard, felt like it was falling apart. And of course, then Gary gave out the Mayday. And so when it crashed,